Good morning. Today is January 13th, 2025. And as part of the pull into the new year, doing everything right, I wanted to talk about the Form 35R. It is the inspection response form and how we're using it with our clients. So first, I want to just kind of start with the basics. What is the reason for this form that we have? Well, it is in response to doing a home inspection. So when we get a home inspected, sometimes we'll have a report that gives us, um, you know, all sorts of things that were found about the house. And in that report, it's likely that we may want to be asking for either a repair or a concession on behalf of our buyer. Well, in order to do that, we have this form that we work with, which gives us not only inspection responses, but space to write in repair requests, as well as referring back to the Form 35, which is the inspection form itself, or inspection addendum itself, with our timelines on responses. So, kind of on the basics of the timelines, I wanted to discuss exactly what that means and what it looks like. So first and foremost, I just pulled up a little bit closer what the Form 35R looks like. Now, the buyer's first options for responses are any one of the following four selections. The buyer can approve it and move forward towards closing. The buyer can disapprove it and terminate the contract. The buyer can give notice that additional inspections are required and then get those done. Or the buyer can ask for the following items to be repaired or the concessions to be made. Now, once a buyer goes ahead and initiates this response, they have to wait the required amount of time for the seller to go ahead and actually respond back. Once you hit send on this, you cannot unsend it. You cannot change your mind. You can't change what you're wanting to request. So once you send this over, it is in the hands of the seller to do a response on that. Now, there is space below here for you to go ahead and write the repair request that you may have. And if you notice, the box is actually very, very small. So typically, if you're going to be writing something in this space, I would highly recommend writing in a concession in this space. If you plan on doing anything more than asking for a concession or perhaps one minor repair, I would suggest attaching a Form 34 so you can accurately ask for that with some more competent verbiage than what may fit in this small box. Now, once that's sent over, boilerplate language says the seller has 3 days to respond. So once that seller responds to you, that starts your response period from them as well. And when the seller sends you over their response to your request, they too cannot change it or modify it until the buyer has had a chance to decide how they would like to respond. Now, the seller's options are also in a very small space to respond, but they have these four options. The seller can agree to the request that was made. The seller can correct a portion of the requests that were made. The seller can suggest something completely different. The seller can reject everything. So the seller does have those four options. And again, unless you're asking for a concession or offering a concession, I would recommend attaching a blank 34 with the explanation or request of what you would like done and referring that 34 to this 35R as quote unquote addendum to 35R or attachment to 35R or something that connects that Form 34 to this 35R. Now, if after the negotiations back and forth, you still cannot come to an agreement, but you'd like to work something out, we have paragraph number 3, which allows that to happen. This is a paragraph that I would recommend using for those negotiations beyond that seller's response, because you only have until your contingency is up, which boilerplate says 3 days after that seller gives you a response, you need to either waive, terminate, accept, you need to have your agreement set in place by the time that timeline is up. So this does give you the option of coming up with some sort of other agreement. And if you notice in the third paragraph right here, the third checkbox, it says buyer rejects the seller's response, but offers the attached proposal. Now, when you do this attached proposal, this is going to be a blank form 34. You're going to be able to write the proposal that you and the other party have come to an agreement with or that you want to propose. Now, the buyer and seller can go ahead and sign that form 34, and then this box can be checked because it will be mutually agreed on that 34. And this one would be an option that you could check and still move forward. You could also just say that you accept everything as it is, and you can move forward beyond that. And then remember, you need to make a response completely by the time that this contingency is over, or it will be deemed waived. Now, in order to do this, let's practice some timelines. These are the things that always kind of get held up, and they are kind of at the most basic level that all of us should feel really comfortable with. So for this example, let's say mutual acceptance is January 6th. Your inspection time, we'll say, is 5 days. And the last day of the inspection contingency, when's that last day of the inspection contingency going to be up? How will our timelines work? And let's just assume for right now, everything is the standard boilerplate timelines. So a 5-day inspection, 3-day response from seller, 3-day response from buyer. So our 5-day inspection would be the 13th. Then if we respond, we would have a 3-day, sorry, I did this totally wrong. We're going to just skip this whole thing. The 13th, it would be 14th, 15th, 16th. And then it would be a 3-day response time back. So we would have our 5-day inspection ending the 13th. The 3-day response time would be 1, 2, 3, ending the 16th. And then the buyer's 3-day response time for that seller's response time would be 3 more days. So 1, 2, 3, it would end the 22nd. We do have lots of people on our team who will be helping us with our timelines. So don't worry about keeping all those in place, but just remember that when we're counting 5 days and less, we're counting business days. And if it's 6 days or more, we're counting actual calendar days. So I wanted to talk about the requirements that we have to meet when we use Form 35R. Form 35R is, in fact, part of the contract, and it's a requirement that everybody who is party to the contract receives a complete copy of that. So if you're working with lenders or escrow, they are required to receive a complete copy of all the contract and all the addenda. So what is not part of the contract? Well, the FERPTA, seller disclosure, home inspections, any pamphlets that you have, any buyer or seller agreements that you have, these are not contractual documents and do not need to be given to as part of the purchase and sale agreement. Obviously, escrow will be asking for the FERPTA, but nobody is going to be asking you for the seller disclosure or the home inspection unless you've written it on the addenda line. So if you've written any of these things on the addenda line, whoever is party to this transaction is going to see those there and think that that is part of this agreement. By adding things like the seller disclosure into the contract, you are creating that as part of the contract, which it is not. Those are not negotiable terms. So let's keep that, the addenda line clear of all of the unnecessary documents, and we can still be communicating those to the people that need to see them.
What about P6, Jen?
No pamphlets.
No pamphlets. It's a
No
pamphlet. All right.
Yeah, P6 is the lead-based paint pamphlet?
No, that's the wire fraud alert.
Oh, that can go, but it's not going to be part of like the mutual acceptance. If you choose to use the wire fraud, then yes, you should send it to everybody in the transaction because you're identifying who the person responsible for sending and receiving money is. So it's more of like a CYA rather than a requirement. But what happens is when a buyer connects with a lender and they start this transaction process, the buyer will actually sign an affidavit that says they are in fact giving this lender everything that's required, including the full contract and all the addendum. So they're representing to that lender that they are giving them the complete contract. So I'm just trying to avoid the confusion of what is part of the contract and what is not. But even when you do an offer, you typically don't put the P6 in with an offer. That's a separate addenda as well. So I'm just kind of trying to think about this in a more black and white, where what is required to be sent and what is not. I guess I hope that makes sense. So the buyer, like I said, signs a representation with their lender to deliver the full contract and complete contract. The lender must be given all of the contract documents. Failure to deliver all the documents is not only fraud, but it's actually a felony. So we need to make sure that we are in fact communicating with that lender all the things that they need to have and keeping back the things they do not. The lender does not need unrelated documents for this contract. The lender must receive all mutually accepted contracts and documents. And remember, we do not deliver the lender any documents that are not mutual or not part of the contract. And this includes escrow too. We would never send escrow a document, a Form 34, say, that had one signature on it, expecting them to do anything. These are the bodies of enforcement here. So if we are the ones creating the terms, they are the bodies of enforcement. So if we're sitting here still trying to create those terms, we're not going to yet tell them that those terms have been agreed on because they have not. It is a Class B felony in Washington State to participate in fraud on a lender. Neither the broker nor any of the parties involved should participate in a scheme suggested by the lending party representative. It's happened in the past where a lender has said, hey, I need you to rewrite this. I don't want to have this in my contract, whatever they're going to say. Participating in anything like that is technically loan fraud. So we want to avoid that. But more importantly, we want to avoid that situation in the first place so that lenders never even asking us to do things like this. We can't participate in that, but we can also avoid getting into that situation. So I wanted to talk about that for a minute. How do we negotiate items? How do we talk about things in a way that we are being transparent, following the law, and doing everything we're supposed to, but at the same time, only delivering the things that need to be delivered, because some of these unnecessary things don't have anything to do with any party whatsoever, especially if nothing ever comes to fruition or nothing ever gets mutually accepted. So it is perfectly acceptable when you are doing any negotiations that have not yet been completely mutual to go ahead and write them back and forth on a 34. So if it comes to, we have an inspection response, say, and there's a bunch of things that we just want done on this, and we don't want to be talking on the phone. We want to get this on paper. We want to get an actual response from our clients. Plus, in our line of business, everything we do is through contracts and it's all on paper. So we want to make sure that we're communicating the way we're supposed to. Well, we can go ahead and write up on a 34 what we would like to have done, and we can send it over. And in doing that, we can see this as a negotiation, kind of like an offer and counteroffer situation. We can ask for the repairs that need to be done. We're not doing anything to conceal them, but what we're doing is we're putting them all out there. And then once we know what the seller is willing to do, they will go ahead and write something back to us in a way that is like a counter offer. So like I said, there's not really room to do this on the inspection response form. So when we do this, we want to also make sure that we are kind of going back to the basics and remembering how we write up things in a way to create an obligation for the other party. I do have another video that shows, some good tricks and tips on how to word items in a way that actually creates the obligation and clearly explains the responsibility of which party is responsible. The 35R is really just a means for negotiation. So when we do this back and forth, I actually have an example of one of the ones I did earlier in my career. So it was something that was there were quite a bit of problems that came up on this inspection, and at the end of the day, the buyer just wanted a credit, but was willing to take work done. And so in order to avoid this sort of not only messy when we're writing up our offers and counter offers and requests, um, the more words we put on paper, the more we're putting ourselves at risk for wording it incorrectly, potentially going outside of our scope by practicing law. So trying to keep everything sort of nailed down and small, but still negotiate with each inspection response. So think of it like an offer counter offer situation. Right here, I hid and I redacted the information so the sellers can remain protected, even though the transaction has long since closed. But the initial inspection response, the buyer requested the following items. The buyer had sent over a Form 34 asking the purchase price to be changed, asking for a credit. So we had also talked about, the reasons for the credit. This is what they sent over. And as a response, we decided to, instead of crossing off things and rewriting them on the same 34, cross it off completely. And if anything were to be changed, drafting up a new Form 34. The seller rejected this in this manner. Also, see attached. There is nothing wrong with how this was done. And then finally agreed on, the one term that was agreed on was drafted on a new 35 or 34, and it says supplement to 35R. It corresponds with the box right here. Everybody signed it, and this was the final agreement. Now, we could have gone back, and this 34 could have listed a multitude of things that were wrong with the property. Having nothing been agreed on and having nothing been relevant to what their request was, we chose to cross it off and we chose to put it on a final copy like this in response to 35R. This final copy of the 35R was sent to the lender. Everybody saw the things that were on this, and we were able to remain transparent and follow the law. So being clear and concise and being able to write it up in a way that lets us deliver a mutually accepted contract with those mutually accepted terms, even based on the inspection response, is going to have everybody on the same page and keep us all above board. Remember that we need to be making clear and concise communication. These requests should not include lists of things that are wrong with the property, just the things that we actually want done. So let's not be frivolous about the things that we just start listing for no reason. As a reminder, all the repairs within the contract will need to be disclosed to a lender. So if you have repairs that need to be done, those absolutely have to go into this and have to be transparent, because there's going to be an action that has to take place before the closing can happen. If they are not mutually accepted terms, if you ask anybody of any party, they don't want to see anything that's not a mutually accepted contract. So make sure everything that is mutually accepted goes to the people it's supposed to, and everything that is not mutually accepted does not. There are terms of the contract which need to be done prior to closing. So there are going to be many reasons why all the parties have to see if work was requested and if it was agreed to be done. I hope that this helps with maybe some of your ways that you respond to inspections, and gives you a little bit better pathway to negotiate those repairs in an open way. And if you have any questions, please let's discuss.